Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Briefing Hub. I am Jeremy Brizell, your host, JB, for those who know me and will get to know me. And we're going to get to know everything we want to know about supply chain efficiency from an expert with over 20 years of experience doing just that in global logistics transformation, operational excellence. His name is Rey Marin. He is COO of Zero Down Supply Chain Solutions and WISM board member. Rey, thanks for taking time out of a busy schedule to join us.
Hey, thank you. It was my pleasure to finally get to meet you. I appreciate the time and the opportunity here.
Oh, it's great. So obviously, it's really interesting whenever sort of behind the scenes industries jump to the mainstream, right? And I could say, and we'll get to this further, but I just want to jump in this way. 2020, when the world stopped, functioning, supply chain was suddenly something everyone had thoughts about.
Right,
so it's great to have you here with us. We're about 5 years out from that big a moment. So why don't you let us know, for those that don't know you, what your experience has been in logistics? I don't think it's just the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off at UPS. I spent quite a bit of time there, over 33 years there. So I've been a little bit over 20 years in the supply chain. And really, the majority of that was in finance and accounting, always with a lens towards operations.
Mm-hmm.
The situation that I was able to, kind of create for myself was that I had enough operational experience where I could, go to an operation, look for improvements, way to optimize things, and still come from a finance and technology perspective, but had enough knowledge and chops
Mm-hmm.
from operators to be able to go there and to make an impact. So did that for a very long time. And then after that, moved away took a role at United Scrap Metal. They were a national metal recycler. I ran logistics for their 8 sites for 3 years. And that was a completely different beast, because I came from Fortune 50, went to a mid-market company.
Mm-hmm.
And it really became obvious how different things were. Things that I basically were born and raised on. Things like industrial engineering, time management, time studies, typical days, planning, forecasting. When I went to the middle market, I realized that, those were relatively new concepts. They were all kind of just, surviving, right? Going from one day to the next. I mean, great companies. I mean, don't get me wrong, but really it became very obvious that, it was very different. It was a very different experience. And then after that, decided to strike on my own as a consultancy. I was a founder for Marin Consultancy.
Mm-hmm.
And currently now I'm the COO for a transportation spend management company called Zero Down. And so I've went from Fortune 50 to the middle market. Now it's a smaller company. A dear friend of mine runs the company. Great guy, Brad McBride, and very interesting to be kind of in the middle. I'm not making anything. I'm not moving anything. Just really trying to find ways to optimize, shippers and carriers who are looking to either optimize their bids, optimize their rates, looking for a TMS that could, help solidify their solutions. And I was lucky enough to partner up with WISM as a board member. Just
Mm-hmm.
a fantastic group of people, and I really enjoyed the work. What really drew me to them was their ability to really treat things, really treat the whole process, very much like UPS did, from a project management perspective, documentation, project plans, milestones, really soup to nuts approach in development, which, sometimes a lot of the middle market companies, smaller companies, they meet a technology provider, and they're kind of in deep water. That the technology companies tend to talk over their heads and make things maybe a little more complicated than they need to be. But I've always found that WISM has been very, very straightforward, very documented, very methodical in their approach, and I really appreciate it. So I was excited when they offered me the board position.
There's so much in that answer that I could jump into in terms of people driving the business, but let's stay away from that. Let's stay with check, because it's just great. It's also great to see the scope, the breadth, verticals that you've been associated with, and as a board member with WISM. Clearly, you are someone drawn to the people in an organization as much as the organization. But again, I'll get to that later. So how has the logistics sector that you've been sort of so deeply enmeshed in for so long transformed over the years? What are some of the, key turning points that you've seen in your experience?
Well, it's definitely changed. I mean, you brought up COVID. That was certainly a milestone or a significant, a watershed, a moment, because I tell people all the time before COVID happened, it's kind of like being a programmer back in, the 80s, like a web programmer. Like if you knew HTML, you could write your ticket. And for a long time, most of my career, transportation logistics wasn't sexy. I mean, it's dirty. It's moving boxes from point A to point B. I would go to weddings and reluctantly, they ask, "What do you do for a living?" I say UPS. I'm like, you lost my daughter's dress. And I would literally look there and cower and say, I really tried not to. I haven't touched a box in 20 years, really, but I really tried not to lose your daughter's dress.
Yeah.
But there is an emotional connection with that company.
Mm-hmm.
Those drivers, they're part of Americana. When you would, and that's what I loved about it so much, because you would go out with a driver and, they would have keys to people's houses and they were just let in and they knew all the dogs. One of my favorite Instagram accounts is Dogs of UPS, which, it's hilarious.
Yeah.
So, COVID definitely changed, and it made it the new sexy, because before that, nobody really cared. We were a cost center.
Mm-hmm.
People worried about how much transportation costs. Oh my God, does it really cost you that much a ship? Mm-hmm. But then when they realized that the supply chain broke down and we were really stressed about it, then that obviously was a game changer. And now you see, and shortly around the same time, the Internet of Things became a big thing.
Yeah.
One of the partners I had in my previous role was Samsara, who did a great job of integrating cameras and telematics and driver logs into one application to really help streamline, not only give you visibility into these things, but give you one pane of glass to be able to attack some of these problems that not just fleets, not just transportation companies, but any company that manufactures something that has their own fleets. There's bakeries that have fleets of a couple hundred trucks.
Totally.
And the last thing they want to do, they want to bake. That's what they got into their business for. They don't want to worry about deliveries, hours of service, safety, which is such a huge component right now. So I think the Internet of Things has really, it was a huge opportunity. I think a lot of the middle market, the UPSs, the Werners, the big Schneiders, JB Hunts of the world, they're in the cutting edge of technology. Sometimes you see the new Schneider or JB Hunt tractors that don't have side view mirrors because they're using cameras now. So, that's a big change in the last couple of years. And then I think lastly, I hate to bring it up because everybody does, is AI. AI is really, and machine learning is really changing the way we look at our operations and how we can move them more effectively. So it's an exciting time to be in transportation.
It is. And actually, that's great, because that's sort of on the timeline that we talk about. I mentioned, COVID and things stopping suddenly. Mainstream conversations were about our supply chain doesn't budge. Where is my dress? I ordered 4 costumes for Halloween 2 years ago.
In one ship goes perpendicular to the Suez Canal, stop all trade for 2 months.
Oh,
how is that possible?
Leah, let's start.
Really interesting.
We'll be here for hours. And that's, again, logistics. If you ever try to make anything yourself, logistics are something that and then when you do that at scale, the scales you're talking about, you have to get really, really understanding systems, whatever. And so it's great to talk to you, to see someone who understands not just where we are in the system, but where we have been. And with that in line, like talk about COVID, mainstream, everybody became aware. A lot of people jumped into businesses, really streamlined and did some successful things to get through that sort of crisis.
Right.
And then we kind of went back to normal. And so now the market's a little bit different. So where are we in the market right now? Where do you see the current trends? What do we expect moving forward over, say, the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, it's an interest. Again, it's a very dynamic situation, but that's really what logistics is all about. And there were driver shortages going into COVID. The dynamic of the over-the-road trucker, or the demographic, I should say, is changing. Nobody wants, people do not want to do that job anymore. It's an aging work group. Typically they're I think the average age is between 47 and 55 years old. They're not getting any younger. And there was a shortage going into COVID. But then all of a sudden you had this huge spike in demand, and all of a sudden, companies like, Amazon would all of a sudden, offer, a $5,000 or $7,000 lane to take 2 loads from here to Chicago, from Chicago to New York. And that brought a lot of people into the transportation world. A lot of existing carriers, basically had to buy more fleets. So it was an amazing time. But then, so capacity had to expand to meet that demand. Then the demand collapsed basically because we went back to, and people started going to stores and picking their own goods up. And but you still have that capacity problem. It had to kind of adjust, and it's been like that for the last 2 to 3 years. Some people call it the freight recession. But I see things that are, things are starting to tighten up. The spreads on some of the rates, both truckload, LTL, are getting tighter. Mm-hmm. You're also seeing that there's some policy issues that are really affecting our capacity. There's legislation for age requirements to be a CDL holding driver, mm-hmm. And then the non-citizen policies that are taking hold. That's a big issue because we have leaned on a lot of Eastern European, South American, and African drivers to come into the network to help us through that. And so, there's a lot of questions there. And then lastly, there's a big crackdown on what we call ghost companies, uh-huh. which, there's some unscrupulous people out there. And what they do is they'll run a shoddy fleet, and they'll get a DOT number. They'll get into a serious accident. They'll shut the doors, and move, a couple doors down and, use a similar address, same owner, same drivers. Uh-huh. And they create this new DOT number. And the government has been slow to react. And my friends at USI, insurance company, they're doing great work trying to educate legislators on the problem. And, ultimately we pay for it, not only in the value, not only in human value, people getting hurt, people getting killed, but also, economically, those insurance rates get passed on to the consumer. So there's definitely some constraints that are going to bring capacity back down to what I would say pre-COVID levels or maybe normal levels. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see that matrix of things you talk about, and the one that obviously those ghost company ones, clearly, like the legality of that is the most directly. We can just get in and sort that. Like that seems to be something that could be addressed right away. Yeah, so
it's a data problem. I mean, and it's funny because when you talk about common sense legislation,
yeah,
it's literally, the names have changed, but they're sometimes in the same building. The owners have the same address, and it's just a data issue, right? It's just, so you give it to a person like me who's been a data geek their whole life. Yep. And, I say, well, I could fix it in 20 minutes because but getting legislation and government to react and do it the right way, right, is the challenge. But I feel like it's getting traction. So I'm excited about that because I think it'll reward the carriers who do things the right way. It'll make for a safer environment on our roads. Right. And also, I think ultimately, insurance rates would come down.
Yeah, and it puts the competition that we want in a marketplace to actually equalize because it's exactly the people that cheat. You can't compete with the people that cheat. I didn't mean to rhyme. That's not part of the strategy here. But it might be how we get into legislation. So when you need a tagline. When you go into do the work that you do with your advisory work, what kind of questions do you ask, man? Like, this is great. Like, you brought it up right away, which, like, you're a data geek, and like, what do you go into to ask these management companies about? What do you look at first? Are you looking at data? Are you looking at the people? What do you look at?
Well, I think both roles at Zero Down and when I consult with the WISM team is really to understand, data is king. Obviously, we know that, we have the mega scalers with the data that they're trying to consume. But when you look at, small, even a company like UPS, we had fragmented data. Data was sitting everywhere. Mm-hmm. Data doesn't talk to each other. There's silos in organizations where, a finance and accounting application doesn't have access to the transportation but those companies like UPS, I was proud of the work we did there. And, those silos, once you had the business case, would break down. But in the middle market and smaller companies, they struggle with not only their data, but it has to be organized. I mean, everybody talks about AI and the potential of machine learning, but you've got to put things in place. You got to have the data. You got to capture the data. You make sure the data is clean, and then you need to organize the data in a way where the machine can make sense of it. So all those things are things that we kind of line up when we engage with our clients, and then really trying to understand what their pain points are and how can we bring value. And some of those things, it's basically education. And I think that's the part when you mentioned earlier about the people aspect of kind of who I am. That's really what drives me, is engaging with clients, engaging with people, and educating and say, listen, it's not rocket science. It's, it's funny. I was working this was before my Zero Down, before Zero Down, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I guess. And I was working with a small carrier on the south side of Chicago, and he was talking about his payroll going through the roof, and I said, well, what does your typical day look like? And that's a UPS term, right? What is your planned day? So how many hours, how long should a driver be driving, right? Mm-hmm. And you got to add in, all their deliveries, all their stops, and then you got to figure out their pre-trip and their post-trip. And, and depending on the type of equipment, that could be 15 to 45 minutes as far as, inspecting your equipment before and after, after your day. And so, he didn't have any answers. So I said, well, let me go look, because that's another famous UPS saying is we didn't used to have on our desk, go look. Because sometimes as executives or managers, you forget the simple things, and you sit behind a computer, sit behind a desk, and you forget, does it really make sense? Does the data that's on my desk match what's the reality? So I went and looked. So I went to his yard, brought a bunch of donuts, and, introduced me. Oh, who are you? I said, oh, I'm just Ray. Hey, have a donut, and they quickly stopped asking questions. And I sat in the break room as I watched people punch in at various times, watching my clock. And, it was like a 2-hour cigarette break, And so before they got their day started. And so I went back to the owner. I said, who do you have managing these people? And he says, well, it's Jim. And I said, well, Jim wasn't there. Let me tell you what I found. Yeah. And, he flipped the gasket, and of course, I want to fire everybody and all this stuff. But I said, no, that's not how you handle this. Let's put some rules in place. Let's set the expectation. Let's put some metrics in place. And then sure, there's going to be a couple bad apples that you might have to, but you unintentionally already, by not following up with your drivers and holding them accountable, you set the standard, and that's the standard you're getting. So that's really what I try to do in any of my engagements, is really go look for the data first, see what I can find out, give me as much of it you can, and then let's engage with the people. Let's find ways to not engage just with a driver, but also the fleet manager and everybody involved. Because if you leave any of those groups out, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, well, you think in systems, right? Like you're a logistics guy, so there's a whole picture to it. It's not one part of it's not one cog in the machine. It's the whole machine. Absolutely. And you also understand the value of donuts. So
listen, you can get a lot of things done with either pizza or donuts. I learned that very
undervalued
in my UPS career.
Doesn't need to be bleeding edge technology to get it done. Yep.
Nope. If you throw sprinkles on that donut, it's a home run.
You will get the data. 3 key challenges you see consistently. What are those? What keeps popping up? What do you see for these organizations?
Taking back my UPS growing up there, it really boils down to 3 things. It's either people, process, or technology. And you really just have to identify what the barriers are, right? And when you look at a process, you run it through, you see what, the outcomes are, and you kind of take each piece and you dissect it. And then again, it's not rocket science. You do, root cause analysis and realize, so what's the problem? So if the problem is that your drivers are not getting out on time, Okay, well, what is that? Is that its process, right? What should they punch in pre-trip? Then go out to do their, or what does that look like? So it's usually never one thing. Yeah. It's usually out of those three things, one is clearly the problem, and then there's probably a couple more that help contribute to the whole process failing.
Right. So those pillars pretty universal. It's a good reminder, though. Some people get in the weeds; they lose track of the real things. So, how do you typically help companies jump in to tackle these problems? And then, how do you track the metrics? How do they track metrics and to get their management decisions on? Obviously, you said one leader wasn't sort of tied into the floor, which is the drivers. That's a big problem. So, those sort of two questions together. What are they? How do you help? And what are the metrics?
Well, and again, getting back to education, some of those things that I literally were just drilled into my head every day is, looking at the process from start to finish and try to identify where those processes break down. If it's it could be a training issue, right? And, I can refer them to people in my network that are fantastic DOT trainers. If it's a management training problem, I can do that. I spent years, part of my UPS career, training UPS managers. If it's a technology, I call up WISM and say, hey, listen, you need to find a custom solution. And not always is it a home run for them, or is an easy fix for them. There might be a better solution that fits them off the shelf. Mm-hmm. And because I think that's a mistake that a lot of middle market to smaller companies make sometimes, is that they immediately, they buy the Salesforces of the world, the HubSpot, the big ERPs or CRMs, and they expect those things to just, turn on and solve all the problems. But you got to integrate them. You have to make them part of, not only integrate them with other systems, but you have to integrate them in your processes. And if you don't do that, they're just going to gather dust. And I see that time and time again in different clients that I've had, and also, in my own company. So that's the challenge. And then if it's a process thing, that's obviously part of what I can bring to the solution. So we tackle those things, and then, we take an inventory and see which is the biggest, what's keeping you up at night, right? I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole and try to tackle something that might be somebody's pet. Maybe it's the CFO is focused just on revenue. Okay, well, you might be making a ton of money, or you're maybe not making enough money, but you're bleeding money out the back end. So what do you want to tackle first, right? It's the chicken or the egg conundrum. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, and it's really about getting to understand their pain points and working towards solutions that make sense. Mm-hmm. And it's not about selling anything. I get told a lot that I'm a good salesman, and I just don't like that idea. I don't know why. Nothing against salespeople, but I just really want to help, and that's what kind of drives me. And then when it comes to key metrics, again, breaking down the process, find out the root cause. What can you fix? What can you do to fix that root cause? Mm-hmm. And then measure it, right? And then measure it. But I think here's the part that people sometimes forget, is that sometimes, so there should be two things, right? If you identify a root cause, either one, you chose the wrong thing. Like if your overall metric doesn't move, right? Right. You say, okay, I've got to work to fix C. I need to focus on A, right? And you go through this process and C doesn't change. Okay, so one of two things. You're either not doing the activity in A that you said you're going to, or you pick the wrong element. You pick the wrong root cause. And you have to be flexible enough and knowledgeable enough to say, okay, we made a mistake. I had a great boss in UPS. His name was Chip Chappelle. He's a great guy, and he was a character. But he would always tell people that I reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow than I am today, which is because you always have to learn, and that's really the best organizations. Learn fast, and they fail fast. If you fail fast, you learn from it and you move on. So,
right. Yeah, that's such a great. You hear the philosophy of it over and over again, which is there's winning and there's learning, and those are the two elements. That's it. So, like, as soon as you lose track of that, you're in hot water.
Absolutely.
I would, with all that, philosophically, it all makes sense. Strategy sounds right. I'd love to have you in the door. If I got you in the door, what are you doing? So, what are some use cases maybe out there that you've had some actual boots on the ground work that you've done that we would understand, right? So, what are the challenges that the organization faced? How'd you help them overcome them? I will offer that it can't only be donuts, Ray. It has to be one.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think you're underestimating a good donut, my friend.
I'm not.
All right, so let's start with UPS. So one of the first things, I guess it was one of the last project I worked on was called trailer optimization, and that really was about how many packages could we get in a trailer, and it really was a shift in our paradigm, because up until that point, I was a part-time supervisor when I started in 1988.
Okay.
And part of my job was to walk by a trailer, take a look, do an audit. I would count the number of ribs in the trailer and figure out how full it was based off of. But it was really but if you think about it, it was just a moment in time, and that was an audit that part-time supervisors have been doing since their dinosaurs were walking around. That's the one that you had to do your audits.
Yep.
If you think about it, it's just a snapshot in time. You couldn't see what happened, the activity before that wall, because it's physically a wall, right? So you can't see behind it unless you take things out, and wasn't part of the process. It was really you push on it to see if there's any voids behind it. And then after I left, I didn't see what happened again. So it was really only a snapshot in time. But when we combined, and I was part of a great, fantastic team with some great leadership who supported me, and it was tough. I had a lot of scars from trying to tell people they've been doing it wrong for a long time.
People love to hear that, right?
They love to hear it. They love to be, told that they're wrong. So, but again, getting back to the go look, because there were people that say, "Oh, the data's wrong. The data's wrong." Because they would always point to the one exception that I couldn't explain. Right? There was 90 other trailers that, made sense, but there was the one exception that proved that the rest were all wrong. So I worked with a guy, Rick Carver, who was a great guy. And these are all friends of mine, so I'm sure they don't care that I mention their names. But I walked out with Rick, and he taught me a valuable lesson. He's like, let's go look, and it reminded me, right? So we would go out with this leader, business unit leader, or division manager, whatever it was, and we'd walk to the first trailer, and it was, not so good. We walked to the second one, not so good. And usually by a third one, that leader would look at us and say, okay, you made your point. And so, and last time, I think Carol Tomei, the CEO of UPS, I think 3 years ago, that said trailer utilization was one of the most important initiatives at UPS. And, I'm sure it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars of savings. And the challenge there was really changing the culture.
Yep.
United Scrap Metal, we put IoT on the trucks, and really given, and it was tough. Drivers didn't like it. They thought we were listening in on them. They felt their privacy was being violated. And I remember that it was in Philadelphia. They were a tough group, really tough group. I mean, if you just imagine Eagles fans as truck drivers. No offense to the Eagles.
No. It's grit. It's pure grit is what that is.
Yes. And saltiness. Grit and saltiness.
Yeah.
But they were totally against it. They were like, there's no way. They would put black tape over the camera, this whole thing. Sure. Until a motorist decided that, you know what, I'm going to, fraudulently say this truck hit me. Slammed on cut him off, slammed on his brakes. And immediately that driver came in and said, I want to see the tape. I want to see a tape. And I said, oh, wait a minute. There's no tape. What tape? And he's like, no, you're telling me. So we're kind of playing with him a little bit. But we showed it to the state police. They quickly exonerated him. Great. It took 15 minutes. The trooper was there. And since then, they were all believers. So that, again, was kind of a culture change, but also just embracing technology.
Sure.
And then one of my clients now at Zero Down, Park West Galleries, they're a fabulous company who ships beautiful artwork all across the country. And really, our skill and ability to bring in disparaging data sources and do comparisons is really remarkable. Because if you think about it, in the LTL world, you're kind of doing a bunch of different comparisons, right? So you have the invoice that comes in.
Yep.
It's usually paper. I mean, some of the big carriers have ADI and API, but it's usually PDF. So you got to consume that, right? And you got to digitize it so you can start making a comparison in a database.
Yep.
And then you got to compare it to the tariff that they're using, right? In LTL world, there's a freight tariff, a rate tariff. Then you also have to add in the fuel surcharge. That's another comparison. And depending on which card they use, it can be the Department of Energy that changes every week on a Thursday. Quote me on that. I think it's Thursday. Then you also got to change. You also got to compare their agreement. So if you think about an invoice that's 3 or 4 pages with a bunch of minutia on it, right? Then you compare it to a contract that could be 15 to 20 pages, and then a tariff that could be another 30 to 40 pages, plus the fuel card. Our ability as a freight out of pay company to look at that and do analysis and say, wait a minute, you shouldn't have been charged for a lift gate. You shouldn't have been charged for an accessorial like residential delivery, or you should have, or the line haul wasn't your agreement. So those are things that we can do. And then really the challenge there was just, getting the owner to really understand what's possible. And then since then, it's been a great relationship.
That's great. And the scope of successes around, and the industries that are set, that's a pretty broad set of industries as well, around this core idea of how do we look at the structured, the unstructured data, bring it in and deliver what we need to deliver. Sometimes you have to look at the tape. Sometimes you need to be on the floor. You need to gather the information, and it's not always going to just come to you in the form you need it. Right.
Right. Absolutely. And the thing is that you almost have, I think it's at a point where unless you're organized, and we all feel it in our email boxes and our YouTube feeds or whatever, the amount of information that is coming at us is unprecedented. I mean, for 20 years ago to be able to, these things that we carry in our pockets are supercomputers, and the amount of information is just staggering. So we have to be able to organize it in a way that we can consume it in a reasonable fashion. And that's where, tools like AI are fantastic to be able to boil things down, because, you can go down these rabbit holes and it could be the right thing, but that's all assuming that the data is correct.
Yeah.
If the data is incorrect, you get it could really be misled. So it's really an interesting time.
That is another 5-hour podcast there, which is like when these pools of data that are getting scraped are poisoned. Right. What do we do?